Debt. Cobb woke with a clear mind and fully refreshed. The Costa Rican Indians were already up and about. They were making breakfast over an open fire. They were Quebecar Indians, and they were, like Cobb, an ancient people. They had similarities in complexion, hair color, and bone structure. There was a connection between them. Miguel Sanchez, Abrigado, y Notario put Cobb in touch with them. They were the same as the Indians Cobb knew in Ontario and Quebec. They wore blue jeans, not feathers, and they lived on reserves the government of Costa Rica had established in the late 1970s. They worked at trades like logging if they worked at all. They still maintained their traditional architecture, wood slat yurts with tall, peaked grass roofs. Life was humming all around Cobb. The rainforest was a living thing. It was dense, and there were dangers that could only be overcome with the guidance of the Quebecar guides. Sunlight came through to the forest floor in shafts. The foliage was extremely thick. Things grew on things that grew on things that grew on things. It was as though every part and piece of the rainforest was being used. It was the most complex ecosystem Cobb had ever seen. In the 3 nights he had slept in the rainforest with the Quebecar guides, he had seen monkeys, sloths, snakes, frogs, many of which could not even be touched because of poisons on their skin, and the largest and most frightening insects he had ever seen. He had hired the 3 Quebecar Indians to walk the land he and Will owned. They followed the maps Miguel Sanchez, Abrigado, y Notario had given Cobb. One of the Quebecar spoke English. The other 2 spoke only Quebecar and Spanish. The land had to be walked every 4 months or so. They had to watch for squatters. Cobb was building the relationships 1109897 Ontario Inc. needed to make sure the job would get done, even if he or Will could not be in the country. Because there was no telling when Cobb would have to leave, and he just didn't like the feeling of being pinned down. Although there was the distinct possibility that he might stay in Costa Rica. It depended on the reliability of the information he had received from Fillmore through Will. Cobb and the Indians had taken some hallucinogenic the night before that the Quebecar knew how to prepare. It was cacao and something else. It was not just for any reason that they would mix up some magic tea and drink it. But a Canadian Indian with land interests in their country was occasion enough, and so they cooked up a pot of magic tea. They drank it in the rainforest. Cobb could remember bits and pieces of the night before, but he could make no sense of it in his mind. There was supposed to be a vision of his animal guide. The jaguar was a favored guide among the local Quebecar, but Cobb had no such visitation, and he concluded that he was a free man, because he knew that vision was debt, and that his debt to society was paid, through Crow, over the year he had lived on parole in Parkdale. Squatters were a serious concern in Costa Rica. They followed old rules in Costa Rica. Whoever was using the land owned the land, which was how it should be, Cobb thought. The land would have to be watched by the Quebecar Indians if Cobb left and went to another country. He and Will had land interests in several Latin American countries, and he had to find Indians in all the countries 1109897 Ontario Inc. owned land. They were the only ones that could watch the land properly, because watching the land meant going into the rainforest to check for squatters, and only the Quebecar could move through and sleep in the forest, which was the way the job had to be done. The descendants of the Spanish had no understanding of the rainforest. They lived in the cities like white men, or at resorts along the Atlantic and Pacific coasts, or on small farms. They could not cover hundreds of hectares in days and lay their heads down in unknown places, nor could they find their way around without maps and compasses. There were companies that Cobb could hire to watch the land, but they would only spot check the land with helicopter incursions, for which they had to cut landing pads in the rainforest, for which they charged, as they charged for the helicopter's time, the pilot's time, and the time to clear and maintain the landing pads. The Quebecar were the best guardians of 1109897 Ontario Inc.'s land in Latin America. He took a bowl of food from one of the Quebecar guides and found a log to sit on in the rainforest. As he looked around, he was stunned by the beauty of everything around him. As he ate, his eye caught a hummingbird, colored like a dozen ribbons tied together. At first he thought it was a large insect, but then he saw that it was a bird by the way it interacted with the flowers and the way it hung in the air, completely still with wings moving faster than the eye could catch, faster than what could be seen, extracting some sustenance from or depositing some pollen into the heart of a purple flower the likes of which he had never seen before. And he thought, "It's all so beautiful, this world." After eating, they continued to hike the land, finishing later in the day at the point where they had begun 4 days earlier. They jumped into a pickup truck, 2 of the Kebakar in the cab, and Cobb and one of the Kebakar in the open bed of the truck, with the wind blowing their long black hair in all directions. They drove for a couple of hours. The Kebakar guides let Cobb off at the furnished home of Miguel Sanchez, Abrigado y Notario, had rented, a small bungalow in Atenas, and Cobb took a short nap when he got there. The visionless stupor that had him wandering through the rainforest by torchlight for much of the previous night had taxed him, and he was a little tired after walking through the rainforest for 4 days. It was hard work. He slept a dreamless sleep until the telephone rang. It was Miguel Sanchez, Abrigado y Notario. "Please, Senor Cobb, come to my office. There is some news." Cobb got up and went into Atenas to make the visit with Miguel Sanchez, Abrigado y Notario. He walked down steep side streets. Atenas was a mountain town, and most things around the city square, including the home he rented, were built into sloped land. It took him only 10 minutes to make it to the city square, which was a small park surrounded by streets and green branches. There were a lot of stone doves feeding on bread. Many of the local elderly went to the city square to feed stone doves. The first of them could be seen at sunup. Most Costa Ricans went to bed with the sun and woke with the sun. Cobb's days started at 4:30 a.m. in Atenas. There was a mass letting out of the big church on one side of the city square. Costa Ricans were serious Roman Catholics. The local Indians told a similar history to Cobb, except their imperial visitors were the Spanish, not the French, but black robes nonetheless, and the Spanish preferred death by blade and gunpowder over smallpox. Or maybe they just weren't as good at extermination as the white men who had colonized North America. But the Kebakar assured Cobb that millions of Indians had died, and that the Spanish were efficient with powder and blades. It couldn't be disputed that they had the black robes in common, though. A lot of the women wore black to Mass, the men wore suits. Every Mass was near capacity in the church, at least the ones that Cobb had looked in on, and the church could seat just under 400. There was an internet cafe on the other side of the city square, a small, well-kept place that served the best coffee Cobb had ever had in his life. The coffee beans were grown by the owner of the cafe. Cobb had gone in several times to send emails to Will back in Toronto. 1109897 Ontario Inc.'s money was accessible through a small bank on yet another side of the city square. The interest rates were outrageous. Cobb went into the cafe and sat down at a computer. The woman who owned the cafe with her husband brought him a coffee. He penned a quick email to Will. "Surveyed the land with the Indians and everything is okay. I'm going to stay here for a while. Cobb out." Cobb drank his coffee quickly and paid the proprietor. Cobb knew he was close. With Crow gone from his life, with what was born in the heart and passed in the heart gone, his mind, like any normal mind, set itself to love and the gentler things in the world. And for him, that was the mysterious and powerful woman of the punishment. Cobb crossed the city square. He went down a long street, down an alley, through a door, up a staircase, to a hallway, and then to a door that said Miguel Sanchez, Abrigado y Notario. Cobb walked through the door, and an attractive, copper-skinned young clerk came out to meet him. She spoke in Spanish, and Cobb just nodded his head. She kept speaking until she knocked on a door. There was a sound from the other side of the door. She opened the door, thus delivering Cobb to Miguel Sanchez, Abrigado y Notario, who, at the age of 70, had the quiet air of a benign magistrate and a gentle and humane disposition. Miguel Sanchez, Abrigado y Notario, promptly stood and shook hands vigorously with Cobb. He put a hand on Cobb's shoulder and offered tobacco and liquor. Miguel Sanchez, Abrigado y Notario, liked to drink mezcal, and the tobacco he smoked was hand-rolled from a farm he did business with. Cobb declined, though Miguel Sanchez, Abrigado y Notario, always made him feel welcome, and the gestures of kindness were not lost on Cobb, who had moved a lot of business for 1109897 Ontario Inc. Miguel's way. It was a symbiotic relationship. Cobb was going to need friends in Atenas, and Miguel Sanchez was a well-known and respected man. And that's how business got done in Atenas, and that's all there was to it. Miguel sat down only after Cobb had refused everything that was offered to him, including an early supper that Miguel's assistant could prepare for them in less than 30 minutes. He got right to business, handing Cobb check stubs from deposits to the bank along the city square, payments from the Costa Rican government on 1109897 Ontario Inc.'s land for conservation holdings. Cobb looked at all the figures, and then handed the papers back to Miguel. "Good," Cobb said. "And the other thing?" Miguel Sanchez, Abrigado and Notario, folded his hands and smiled as widely as his face would let him. "We have news, Senor Cobb. Very good news for you, Senor Cobb. It seems our agents have a trail in San Jose. It seems, Senor Cobb, that the woman, Fatima, is in Costa Rica. How long? It should only be a matter of days, maybe a week." Cobb stood to leave. "What about the bananas?" Miguel asked. "My man in Canada will look at the business plan," Cobb said. "I'm not at liberty to decide about the bananas." And with that, Cobb departed the office of Miguel Sanchez, Abrigado y Notario, and he said goodbye to the copper-colored girl with the black hair, and dropped down the staircase, pushed open the heavy door to the alley, and walked swiftly and purposefully to the city square. He bought some breakfast and inhaled while standing. He spotted a woman selling kittens out of a box in the park. Cobb walked up to her, looked in her box, and grabbed a thin little black kitten by the pinch of skin behind its ears. It hissed a little, so he held it up to his face and tapped it on the nose a couple of times, until it became quite docile. He handed the woman some bills and walked across the park, out of the city square, across the street, and to the room he had rented. He would take care of the cat until he could give it to Fatima. End of chapter.